first panel discussion is about the Nehruvian statecraft, is a term which is used for the political, economic, and foreign policy framework established by India's first Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru. His tenure was a combination of democratic socialism, mixed economy, scientific advancement, and a non-aligned foreign policy. Now, one topic, this is the topic for the first panel discussion, and the Nehruvian statecraft, this is how we've titled it, Nehruvian statecraft in India's global positioning from Panchsheel to global south. And I call upon our panelists, Professor Manu Bhagwan. He is the Indian American historian and professor of history and human rights at Hunter College. His research focuses on the 20th century India, intellectual history, human rights, and constitutional history. Professor Manu Bhagwan, please have your seat here. Then I call upon Professor Mridula Sinha. She's the retired IS officer and now a public policy professional at Florida. Ma'am, please have your seat. And Ashutosh is moderating this session. He needs no introduction. He's already introduced himself. He's a popular television anchor, which he will never say. He was, and he still remains a popular face. He's a political commentator. Yes, Ashutosh, the floor is yours.
Good morning again. I think the world has never been so uncertain ever, and hope it will not be. Where nobody knows what is going to happen in the next minute, in the next hour, in the next month, in the next year. And it's not only with India, but across the globe. And I could imagine the same situation would have Mr. Nehru would have faced in 1947 when he became the Prime Minister of the country, because this was the time when the whole world, in fact, Western world was thinking about that India being so poor, India had no experience of any governance, whether the India will survive ever. There was one gentleman called Winston Churchill, and nobody had dreamt so much about the demise of the country, demise of India. So from the deep pessimism, it was the Nehru himself which has brought India to where we are today. If we are a proud democracy today, I think if I had to give credit to one person, that person is Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. And very recently, I was just reading his book, The Discovery of India. दूसरी बार मैं पढ़ रहा था और मुझे लगा कि अगर पंडित जवाहरलाल नेहरू अगर प्राइम मिनिस्टर नहीं होते अगर वो पॉलिटिशियन नहीं होते, फ्रीडम मूवमेंट में अगर उनका रोल नहीं होता, तो भी दुनिया उनको भुला नहीं सकती थी, बिकॉज हिज राइटिंग्स वर सो रिच, लैंग्वेज वाज so beautiful. He would have emerged as a colossus, as a literary figure. His sense of history was so good. Just imagine, he wrote that thick book sitting in a jail. And उस किताब को पढ़ते हुए आपको ये समझ में आती है कि why we so badly need Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru today, and why the father of the nation, Mahatma Gandhi, chose him as his successor. And in fact, महात्मा जी ने इस बात को कहा था कि मेरे बाद सरदार पटेल नहीं, चक्रवर्ती राजगोपालाचारी नहीं, दूसरे लोग नहीं, बल्कि पंडित जवाहरलाल नेहरू मेरे उत्तराधिकारी होंगे. He will be my successor. And look at the democratic ethos, the consciousness, and they were such great men. और वो गांधी जी अपनी उस स्पीच में कहते, जहां उन्होंने पंडित जवाहरलाल नेहरू को अपना उत्तराधिकारी घोषित किया, कि नेहरू जब से आए तब से सिर्फ मुझसे लड़ते ही रहे हैं. He has been fighting with me on each and every subject, on each and every issue. और लोग कहते हैं कि ये तो आपके खिलाफ बात करते हैं. तो गांधी जी उस वक्त कहते हैं, मेरे जाने के बाद जवाहर वही बोलेंगे, वही करेंगे जो मैं कहता. That was the crux of democratic ethos. That's what the democracy is all about. Democracy is not about majority and minority, in my opinion. Democracy is about, can we respect disagreement? Can we agree to disagree? Democracy is not about majority rule, in my opinion. Democracy is all about realizing the minority rights, how the minority. और गांधी जी इस बात को कहते हैं कि ये जो बार बार मेजॉरिटी रूल्स के बारे में बात करते हैं, ये डेमोक्रेसी की परिभाषा नहीं है. डेमोक्रेसी की परिभाषा ये है कि इस मुल्क के अंदर जो सबसे कमजोर आदमी है उसकी आवाज सुनी जा रही है, नहीं सुनी जा रही. जो सबसे कमजोर कम्युनिटी, उसकी आवाज सुनी जा रही, नहीं सुनी जा रही. और मुझे ऐसा लगता है कि गांधी जी के जाने के बाद पंडित जवाहरलाल नेहरू ने उस स्पिरिट को जिस तरीके से स्टेट क्राफ्ट में इम्बाइब किया, जिस तरीके से स्टेट क्राफ्ट में उसको, क्योंकि गांधी जी को कभी सरकार चलाने का मौका नहीं मिला, तो गांधी जी जो सोचते थे, गांधी जी जो कहते थे, गांधी जी जिन चीजों को बिलीव करते थे, नेहरू जी ने उसको अपनी फॉरेन पॉलिसी में, नेहरू जी ने अपनी डोमेस्टिक पॉलिसी में उसको इम्प्लीमेंट किया और दुनिया को ये रास्ता दिखाया कि बहुत ही गरीब मुल्क भी डेमोक्रेसी के रास्ते पर चल सकता है. और शायद बहुत कम लोगों को इस बात का एहसास होगा कि दिस आवर सिविलाइजेशन हैड नेवर बीन an egalitarian civilization. With one stroke of a pen, when we adopted Indian Constitution, suddenly everyone became equal. This was such a silent revolution, which I think we had never witnessed and we had never seen and we have never realized. कि एक जिसको अंबेडकर कहते थे ग्रेडेड इनइक्वालिटी, उस ग्रेडेड इनइक्वालिटी में इक्वालिटी के कॉन्सेप्ट को लाना, उसको इम्बाइब कराना और उसके बाद डेमोक्रेसी को सक्सेसफुली चलाना. आई ड्रेड if Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru had not been the first prime minister of the country, if somebody else had been the prime minister of the country. No disrespect to any of those stalwarts of Indian freedom movement. All of them were great people, so large-hearted. जब सरदार पटेल से ये हुआ कि सरदार पटेल और नेहरू के बीच में झगड़े हैं, तो वो सरदार पटेल जो कहते हैं कि मैं गांधी जी का सिपाही हूं, गांधी जी के बाद जवाहरलाल नेहरू हाथ पकड़ कर चलेंगे, और वो 17 साल बड़े थे. आप सोचिए. टुडे वी आर ब्लेस्ड, हमारे बीच में प्रोफेसर मनु भागवत इस वक्त हमारे साथ मौजूद है. हाउ शुड आई भगवान और भगवान एंड मृदुला जी हमारे बीच में है. मेरा एक बुनियादी सवाल जो होगा कि क्या आज के जिस युग में हम जी रहे हैं, and where, as I said, there's so much uncertainty. The world has never witnessed this kind of uncertainty ever since 1945. We were so used to living in a rule-based system, but now every rule is thrown to the dustbin. There is hardly any law, neither in the global politics nor in the Indian domestic politics. Can I request Manu Bhagwan ji to come and talk about Nehru's foreign policy and how the statecraft has been used? Please come.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Ashutosh, for that kind introduction. Before I start, I just want to say to Nilu, and I had a chance to speak with Ashutosh briefly before we got started, and I'm really struck by the fact that this is really, honestly, a room full of heroes. You have accomplished so much, and you stand for so much, and you are important to so many people. And then to walk into this room and you're also humble and you're talking about very small people like me. But I think that you all really deserve the credit here. So I just want to say that really the honor is mine to be in this room, and what you've done in India and what you're still doing is so impressive, considering that we here in the United States are just at the cusp of the same kind of issues, and how challenging this moment is before us. In order to keep on time and to make the most sense, I just have prepared some remarks. That's just easy for me to stay on track. I just also want to say that I'm grateful to Anand Vardhan Singh and the Public India for organizing this 2-day meeting and for inviting my participation. Distinguished guests, fellow panelists, and friends, it is my honor to help begin our conversation this morning with a discussion of early Indian efforts to respond to the extant world crises of their time. What they offered was an attempt at a holistic solution that was proposed in conversation with others being put forward by powers like the United States, but not confined to them. The world order that emerged, the one that we know, was not the one of India's conceptualization, though they quickly adapted and navigated it as best as they could. As that order dissolves now before us, revisiting the alternatives of Gandhi and Nehru seems worthwhile, not so much as a task of looking longingly back at an imagined past, but as a means to productively consider an alternative future. There was the ferment in France resulting in fascist riots and the formation of a national government. And far worse, in Austria, Chancellor Dollfuss was shooting down workers and putting an end to the great edifice of social democracy there. States, the UK, Ireland, and of course the United Nations, where she would become the first woman elected president of the General Assembly. In the late 30s, she watched outside 10 Downing Street as Chamberlain declared peace for our time. A few days later, she denounced the betrayal of Czechoslovakia and warned of dark consequences. It was the headline the next day when shortly thereafter, Winston Churchill would make his famous remarks in Parliament criticizing appeasement. As World War II got underway, Nehru drafted what would come to be known as the Quit India Declaration, announced in August of 1942. In it, he promised an independent India's assistance in the Allied effort against fascism and proposed a world federation to take the world forward once the war was over. When that moment finally arrived, Vijay Lakshmi Pandit led a counter-delegation to San Francisco to demand that the new United Nations hold to higher ideals and put an end to imperialism, racism, and discrimination, which were the underlying causes of war. As Nehru took over the government in an interim capacity, he laid out the foundations of Indian foreign policy objectives, which included the ultimate goal of developing something he called One World, a phrase borrowed from US Republican Wendell Willkie and that stood for both economic and political freedom. Vijay Lakshmi Pandit was sent to New York immediately thereafter in late 1946. South Africa, led by Jan Smuts, a key architect of the liberal imperial system that had been centered on the League of Nations, had implemented a law that targeted the Indian community and placed additional restrictions on them. Pandit was charged with bringing the case up before the new United Nations and using the forum to force South Africa to change course. What happened next would set the precedent for much of the revised international system that followed. I'll zoom in on this moment briefly by reading a short excerpt from my new comprehensive biography of Madam Pandit, as she was widely known. Nan, that's her nickname, landed at LaGuardia Field to clear skies and pleasant fall weather early in the day in mid-October. Just before her departure, she had broadcast her analysis of the South African situation and its ramifications and foreshadowed the case she hoped to make in New York. Today, fundamental rights, so recently promised to the peoples of the world, are being denied to Indians living in South Africa, thus raising a question of moral and human issues, which contains the gravest implications for the future peace and progress of the world, she said. We believe that an enduring peace cannot be achieved so long as there is discrimination against one race by another. The Indian case in South Africa becomes therefore a test case, not only on the question of human rights, but also for the purposes of principles of the Charter itself, she concluded. Later, Nan was the featured speaker at a mass meeting of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People in the United States, the NAACP, at a jazz club in Harlem in New York. 1,000 people were in attendance. the secretary of the NAACP, Walter White, introduced her as one of the 2 greatest women in the world, that's a quote, along with Eleanor Roosevelt. The separation of the peoples of the world through suspicion and hatred, a condition far worse than war, now threatened peaceful human coexistence, she declared. She called for action to match the beautiful words now being heard at the United Nations. There is only one problem in the world today, of which all others are merely a part, she said. The name of that problem is the denial of justice. People are being told that they must wait for one thing or another because of the many problems that must be solved first, but they cannot wait. The plenary session of the General Assembly was scheduled for the evening of the 7th of December in Flushing Meadows in Queens in New York. At last, it was time. Jan Smuts came to the podium and defended his country, charging that it would be monstrous for the UN to condemn a member state. Then Nan, elegant and commanding in a black silk sari, strode down the aisle and onto the stage. It is too late now to argue that fundamental violations of the Charter are matters of domestic jurisdiction of member states, she began. If this was the case, the Charter would be a dead letter, and our professions about a world free from inequalities of race, free from want, and free from fear, these are references to the 4 freedoms I just mentioned, are empty mockery. I want to carry the Assembly with me in these matters which I submit are common ground. We are trustees of the future, architects of the new world. Forces and feelings which move the minds of men are often more far-reaching in their effects than material forces. We must create for the United Nations the abounding confidence of the common people in it as the defender of justice, public law, and morality. This is what I ask you to do. She had spoken for about 15 minutes. As she turned to make her way back to her seat, the Assembly roared its approval with loud and prolonged applause, and one of the warmest ovations ever accorded a speaker at any of the international organization's sessions. All sound went out of the room as the vote started to roll in around 2 a.m. in the morning, as everyone held their breath. But the verdict was soon clear. The Indians had triumphed. Her daughter, the writer Nayanthara Sehgal, Nayanthara leapt up from her chair and ran over to her mother, who was still seated at the delegation table. She gave her a joyful kiss, which suddenly could be heard in the entire chamber as it was picked up by Nan's live microphone. It was just the spark the crowd needed. The hall broke out into tremendous applause. People from all over the room swarmed forward to congratulate Madam Pandit on her great hard-won victory over racial discrimination. Emotional delegates started crying for joy, jumping on desks and embracing one another. South African Representative Heaton Nichols looked on glumly from his seat as admirers followed Nan into the lounge next door. Nayanthara covered her mother in kisses again. The Black press and race justice activists savored the defeat dealt to white supremacy. The New York Amsterdam News wondered on its front page how South Africa would save themselves from isolation in one world now that they had been handed such a humiliating setback. The paper noted that all comers, even the deceptive and hypocritical Sir Hartley Shawcross, who was the lead prosecutor in the Nuremberg trials, and former Solicitor General of the United States, Charles Fahey, these are 2 of the greatest legal minds in the world at the time, that neither Shawcross nor Fahey, that either of them were no match for the brilliant and silver-tongued oratory of Vijayalakshmi Pandit. The paper called the victory one for our side in an editorial, evocatively writing that racial Jim Crow had been blasted as out of line. They celebrated the stand that the diminutive and charming Indian delegate, who they noted had broadly identified herself with the struggle of all colored peoples against discrimination, had taken against the full battery of American arrogance, English chicanery, and their boot-licking stooges. It now remains for us, they wrote, and for all who believe in one world, to work that first step out to its fuller conclusion of justice for all men everywhere. The Atlanta Daily World headlined a front-page story. Madam Pandit leads fight for minorities, and noted that she was also urging Negro unity for independence. Writing in the Chicago Defender, the greatest African-American intellectual of the time and of his generation, W.E.B. Du Bois, declared that every Negro organization in the United States ought to send an official note of thanks to Madam Vijayalakshmi Pandit, adding that she should be known to all persons of African descent as the leader of the successful assault upon the color line. He observed that she had not confined her attack to the Indian problem. Rather, she repeatedly spoke of the situation of the natives and the disabilities under which they labor. He praised her for unselfish and courageous attitude and wrote that he hoped that it would spur solidarity and a more unified front against racial injustice everywhere moving forward. So broadly speaking, this reading from my book demonstrates that women have played important roles in political and international affairs. These were not merely tangential or supportive, rather they were instrumental in the development of various policies and programs. We need deeper and more insightful understanding of these perspectives if we are truly to understand the possibilities that they encompassed. In this particular case, the actions of Vijayalakshmi Pandit served as the basis for international human rights, for all international human rights, as the Assistant Secretary General for the UN laid out in establishing the Human Rights Commission just several weeks later. This would prove a fork in the road. For Nehru, there were twin teleologies of rights, one for positive and one for negative, meaning one lineage focused on state obligations, while the other dictated civil liberties that existed without state interference. Both, he argued, were necessary for true freedom to exist. And for this to work and be enforceable required world democratic government as opposed to global governance. Of course, it was the latter that ultimately evolved, and positive rights never achieved the same commitment as the negative ones, for reasons tied to the Cold War. The United Nations was a vital organization through the 1950s, and India remained influential in it through this period. But its role shifted over the course of the 1960s as waves of decolonization led to a surge of new members. Old imperial powers moved to protect their interest and recentered power in the Security Council and away from the co-equal branches of the organization. Our current moment, as I wrote about in an essay that trended around the world in 2016, stems from three overlapping forms of globalization that coalesced in the 1990s, building off changes dating back to the 1970s and 1980s. The globalization of the economy has produced a system of massive multinational corporations beyond the reach of any one government. The globalization of conflict, as in the long war on terror, or what some in the populist left and right now call the infinite war, left people feeling unsafe in their own homes and on their own streets, afraid of both foreign governments and their own, in addition to non-state and rogue actors. And finally, the globalization of crises, such as with climate-induced catastrophes or the all-pervasive COVID pandemic, has further eroded any sense of stability and erased confidence in the future. Democratic systems designed for deliberation were slow-footed to react, undermining people's faith in such systems to adapt to fast-changing needs. And this has opened the door to authoritarian populists who claim that they, and they alone, can fix things. The bull in a china shop approach taken by these populists has appalled status quo leaders who, like their interwar forebears, are shocked and mystified in defenses of what appears to have few takers. This is not to diminish the dangers of our time, but to diagnose them. As national democracies and a bloated bureaucratic United Nations, enfeebled from decades of imperial machinations, fumble, stand flummoxed by the growing discontent. Older systems of tyranny are being enmeshed with new technologies to create a cyber leviathan where digital ID, AI-powered surveillance, and an electrified, unified oligarchy committed to accelerationism and the destruction of the old to herald the imminent arrival of the singularity, a dystopian matrix-like future where they rule supreme. Of what use are Gandhi, Nehru, and Madam Pandit against this madness? Well, for one, they correctly observed in their time that there were multiple types of internationalisms. The globalized world that we have known for nearly a half century is but one variety. No one was faster to call out the failures of the underlying systems which these iconic, to call out the failures of the underlying systems than these iconic leaders of their day. Pandit, for instance, chastised her own government, of which she was a part, for being prisoners of indecision in the 1960s. And then, when her own niece, Indira Gandhi, suspended the Indian constitution to impose a draconian emergency, she came out of retirement to challenge this authoritarian takeover and save democracy. She issued a clarion call then, which still rings true today. She said, "I have remained a passive spectator far too long, but I cannot live at peace with myself if, by my silence, I seem to agree with the destruction of all I have been taught to hold dear. It is of the highest importance to put an end to the authoritarian trend which has grown to vast proportions and is destroying cherished values. Values which have guided us through the freedom struggle, values which uphold the dignity and worth of the individual. The institutions which we have built up through the years of independence were smothered and destroyed, one after another. The rule of law was undermined, and the independence of the judiciary ended. Press censorship was imposed. Now, courage, moral and physical, are at their lowest ebb, and the shadow of fear has reduced us to mere shells. People are afraid to speak, and have acquiesced in the denial of the very freedoms for which an earlier generation fought and laid down their lives. The essence of democracy is the right to dissent. This does not imply disloyalty to the country. Exchange of views and discussions are a democratic way towards a solid base on which the future progress and prosperity of the nation should be built. The corrosion of democracy must stop. To save democracy now is to reinvent it, to emphasize responsiveness, so that it is more fleet-footed in its deliveries while diminishing none of its deliberative duties. Loosely, local governments need to be empowered to meet the needs of their citizens, but global citizen councils must connect the local to the international. Modern states need to shed unnecessary bureaucracies while revitalizing public sectors to increase affordability and livability. We can see the dead end to which ultranationalism will lead us all. Chest-thumping claims of superiority by one people trigger outrage and similar antics from other groups elsewhere. For India, this has had dramatic consequences, as Muslim-majority countries in the Middle East have suddenly sought realignment by forging partnerships with a next-door neighbor to the north. The Indian diaspora, one of the country's greatest assets, has suddenly found itself facing an unenviable global backlash as anti-Indian rhetoric heats up in the United States, in Canada, in the United Kingdom, in Australia, in China, and even in Ireland. An India that has avoided acknowledging anti-immigrant and anti-minority activity within its own borders now finds it difficult to advocate for those of its own beyond its borders. And this is what leads us back to the Mahatma. For when the problems of the world last seemed so big and individuals so small, Gandhi theorized that each of us in our ways were contributing to these larger concerns, however unintentionally. He called on Indians to attain Swaraj, which many interpreted to mean independence, but which more specifically meant rule of the self, as the scholar Ananya Bajpai has written. Through small daily acts, our dietary choices, and regular regimen, and service to others, we could assert our will and develop the mental and spiritual rigor to find truth. This truth Gandhi equated with the divine and universal love. This, he concluded, was the ultimate power, against which the agents of untruth and violence were no match. Deployed strategically, satyagraha, or truth force or love force, could break the stranglehold of unjust forms of oppression. So Gandhi, Nehru, and Madam Pandit provide us with methods, with motivation, and with maneuvers to turn the tide and build a more hopeful, a more fair, and a more just world for all people. While our time is not the same as theirs, and we must of course think precisely about today's problems and tomorrow's needs, their values and ideals are timeless and as useful now as they were then. I look forward to discussing these notions in more detail with all of you over the next 2 days. Thank you.
Thank you. For a minute, I thought that he's trying to tell us that how great Vijayalakshmi Pandit was, but then I realized that this was the time when ethical and the moral values were so important in our foreign policy, and India was in a position to stand up for those who were really victims of the politics, victims in the global politics at that point of time. Thank you so much for such a brilliant thing. And before I call upon Mridula ji, I must say this: we are living in a time where people are saying yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata abhyuthanam adharmasya tadatmanam srijamyaham परित्राणाय साधूनां विनाशाय च दुष्कृतां धर्म संस्थापनार्थ संभवानि युगे युगे. So when we are living in a time when the people think that they are not biological, the ethical and the moral question becomes suddenly very important. They think that they have arrived in this world because they are here क्योंकि धर्म की ग्लानि हो रही है. Do they really understand dharma? Do they really understand morality? I think that's the most important today. And when in today's world, when we find ourselves absolutely lonely, and we are not standing but for the big values we used to stand up at that point of time in 1947 or 1948, when we are absolutely people had no hope from us, क्योंकि हमारे जो मृत्यु दर what was the 30 साल 31 साल थी हमारे ख्याल से लोगों की, अभी तो 70 साल एवरेज एज 33, 3 या 4% लोग थे जो उस वक्त पढ़े लिखे थे, कुछ इस तरीके की बातें थी. At that point of time, we could stand up for the ethical and the moral values in foreign policy and the global affairs. Why can't we do it today? That's the most important. That's why I said, yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata. जो ये कहते हैं, do they really understand? Now I call upon Mridula ji to talk about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashutosh ji. Professor Bhagwan, you gave such a elaborate framework that I need not go into the intellectual depth. I would rather speak from what I have thought over these 2-3 days and my experience in the Indian civil service for more than 35 years. So first and foremost, after talking to you all and after thinking about India in last 6 years when I have been out of India, out of my service, no matter what, I'm very optimistic. I'm optimistic because I still know of many teachers in rural India who take 2 buses in a day and go and teach for the whole day. Whether students are willing or not, they teach, they try to motivate them. I know of an election worker, in every election, he crosses 3 rivers with the ballot box on his head and conducts the election and makes the foundation of a democracy strong. I don't know how many of you have seen the rural villages at their schools. You go to the schools and see the dream in the eyes, the gleaming eyes of those kids. So much dream, so much hope. The need of the hour is to just provide them some motivation to take them along. And while talking, I was listening very carefully of what Ashutosh said just now about 1947 and what you spoke about independent India, the newly independent India. I often wonder, that how romantic that phase was. I mean, how great it must have been to be alive at the time, to be in a position to say that we are independent, to say that we are deciding our own destiny, to listen to all those stalwarts in person. We missed all that. I mean, we almost came a generation after, when much was lost. But think of India, I mean, which was like a child bleeding. And think of India, the same India, because it had leaders like Nehru and other stalwarts and Gandhi in the background. The same India could motivate all those countries which were traumatized by the colonial past, be it Latin America, be it Africa, wherever. I mean, the fact that what emerged as Global South strongly after 1948-50. I mean, people talk of the Bandung Conference that gave a shape to the non-aligned movement and all those things. And we were leaders. What were we? I mean, just now Ashutoshji talked about the mortality rate and infant child mortality and education and everything. Still, we were able to lead all those nations. Why? Because we had that moral force. We had that authority. We could speak because we had Gandhi behind us. We had entire, like everybody thought, even till recently people thought that, okay, Indians are poor, Indians are not so educated, but India had such great appeal to the world, and that appeal was because of our insistence on non-violence, on civil disobedience. At least we had that kind of branding which was done. I mean, I would call it, I mean, this is not a very good word, but India had branded itself very well in the 40s, 50s, 60s. And the entire non-aligned movement showed its impact on development. I have worked in the field of development mostly. In fact, I have worked in social sector mostly. And I remember that even in the 80s, all our discourse, all our programs, we had so much energy with the Global South. I'll just give you an example. You all must have heard about the conditional cash transfer. I mean, we talk a lot about the direct benefit programs. It all came from a small country like Brazil, Bolsa Familia. And that program, I mean, we all learned from that. We learned from Grameen, Bangladesh. I mean, all our self-help group program came from the model of Grameen. Similarly, each country learned from each other. I remember going to those conferences in the 80s and 90s in the development sector, and we would have participation from African nations, from Latin America, and there was so much zeal, and so much, like oneness that we shared from each other. We are together. And there was a kind of thing that we can give a fight to the north. There was, of course, there was a racial thing. There are a lot of things that we have been exploited, and there's a need to grow together, to come together. And we had series of meetings all over, and we were doing well. Then many things happened in between. I mean, globalization happened, conflicts happened, the Cold War ended. It was no longer a bipolar world. I mean, in fact, it became multipolar. That zero-sum mentality was over in the 90s after the collapse of USSR. Then the non-aligned movement became strategically aligned thing, and all the countries, they moved to their third generation. The earlier leaders, then the leaders, then the recent leaders, they're very confident, they're smart, they're educated. They feel that their sovereignty cannot be questioned. They're a sovereign nation, and they should have the confidence to deal with any nation, be it north, be it south, whatever. So things kind of diffused. And our non-aligned movement slightly took a backstage. However, I'm very happy to note that recently, I mean, in fact, I was very happy to see that even the much talked about G20, we talked so much about G20, we could induct AU as the 21st member. That is a very good thing. Recently, the UN is talking a lot about Global South. In fact, all of a sudden, again, this concept is emerging. That's a good thing, because like now we're realizing that after all, no matter what, there are certain realities which cannot be denied, and those realities are poverty, about your military power, about your positioning. So we have to be together. So this is a very good thing. In fact, very recently, when Mr. Jaishankar was here in the United Nations General Assembly, my colleagues were telling me that we have entered into at least 85 bilaterals with various African countries and Latin American countries. So these are good things. At least something is emerging. However, I mean, all this framework, I mean, since we are talking of Nehru and Gandhi, whatever is happening or whatever we have today in our country is because of the robust framework given by them, and we all owe them a lot. The only thing I want to talk about three things in the context of the framework we are talking about. First is global south vis-a-vis India. Second is China vis-a-vis India. Since we are talking of Nehru, we are talking of us, China. We have to examine a little bit critically that how we are looking at it and whether it is a good strategy or not. And third is our own development issue, because like there's kind of there's a kind of parallel narrative going on. Internationally, we want to be, in fact, I was kind of amused when after G20 we had some online conferences with other nations of Africa, and then there was a statement from the Minister of External Affairs that India can be the bridge between North and South. Then often we still say that India is a leader and those things. So we have to kind of very realistically examine that within the given framework where we stand. So talking of the global south, like as I was saying, these countries have become very sovereign. We are where we are. It's no longer Nehru's country. We have to realize that we can't sell ourselves very easily these days. It's very difficult. So in order to have a position in the global affair, we should be honest about what we are. It's very important. It's very important, and we should not ever give the impression that we have those tendency where like we are kind of big brother, that we are big democracy. We have 140 million people is no answer. We have to also see that out of those 140 million people, 800 million people are living on charity. So these things we have to accept. There's no harm in accepting. It makes us stronger if we accept our weaknesses. Same thing with so that is one question I think we need to examine, that where we stand vis-a-vis global south and how do we position ourselves is very important. How realistic we are, that is also very important. The second thing is looking, since you're talking of Nehru, we're talking Panchsheel, it's important that we look at China. It's very important that how we stand vis-a-vis China. Personally, I feel that there's a lot of hypocrisy. When we talk about China domestically, there's a lot of hypocrisy. Come Diwali and we'll be all be protesting against Chinese, good Chinese, ye wo, 100 tarah ki cheezein. But look at the trade deficit we have with China. Look at China's position where we started together in 1949 and where we are and where they are. Why can't we accept? We have to accept it. There's no harm in accepting that that country has done well, and it's very important to have peaceful border with them. And had Nehru been alive, he would have wanted that. He would have wanted a kind of win-win situation for both the countries. So that needs to be examined very closely. Wherever we are, we have to think, because that is one thing we cannot ignore. That's their strategic shadow is falling on South Asia. In fact, out of so many countries in the global south, 41 have signed BRI. They are part of BRI, and they have the individual connection, individual obligation vis-a-vis that country. India is a big country, cannot ignore. Nehruvian philosophy, Nehruvian framework would have told us to think more closely, cleverly. I'm not talking, I don't know what's going on. We are not here to really talk about external affairs policy, but still, as a country, we need to have a solution to whatever is going on. And the third, which is very important, which is very close to my heart, is development. All said and done, everything, Gandhi, Nehru, everything, but where we are as a country today. Look at our position, look at our poverty, look at our education system, look at the collapsed institution, and look at the indifference. Everything is fine. This same situation was in 1947 also. But there was so much zeal, there was so much excitement about doing things. Look at our indifference. The middle class, the high middle class, everywhere. When people say India is doing very well, it puts me off so badly. When I see those Blinkit, India is doing well, and they say 5-10 minutes में खाना आ जाता है, Blinkit का खाना आ गया, वो Zomato वाला आ गया. a country which cannot send ambulance in 3 hours is talking of delivery boy. I mean, since you're just exploiting the available labor, exploiting the unemployed youth, and you're very proud of it, I think we need to examine all these things. It's very important. And I see so much indifference. I mean, obviously, political class, we know who they are. But what about the civil society? Where are they? Are they questioning? No, I don't. I mean, I have seen them. I have been on the other side of many such discussions on the table, and I have seen that people's concern, it was so personal. They would always come with personal agenda. It was always do this, do this, do this. Nobody even talked about this. I don't think anybody can do. I mean, individually we can't do anything about it. But are we talking about it? I'm so happy to meet these eminent journalists here, and I mean, I have been watching their channel. I mean, in fact, my Shindu knows that I keep watching everything from India all the time, and I'm very happy to know that people are questioning, people have the guts, but this questioning should be taken forward. This thing should be, I mean, we should definitely, we the people of Republic of India should do something, that some concrete action takes place somewhere. Otherwise, what's the point? What's the point of all these things? What's the point of being troubled? We can also live in an ivory tower very easily. I mean, all of us can live in an ivory tower and just call the Blinkit guy and he'll deliver the food for you. That's it. I mean, if India is that, that is that. But questioning, saying things is very important. So I don't have much to say, Shreyaji, beyond this, but I think this is a very good discussion. And we as a country, we as citizens, we have a tremendous role to play. Thank you.
That was a bureaucrat speaking from the heart. She retired as a additional chief secretary in Jharkhand. So this perspective is really important. कि Blinkit की बात तो करते हैं 10 मिनट में आ जाता है, लेकिन ambulance 3 घंटे में क्यों नहीं आता है? And in fact, the ambulance should reach in 10 minutes, and the Blinkit, if reaches it, takes another half an hour. And that's now the floor is open for the questions, and if anybody want to ask questions, my only request is the question should not exceed more than 30 seconds, because
you'll have to
and please introduce yourself, and the question is addressed to whom. That is also very important. Please.
I have to apologize. I won't be able to do your 30 seconds. I have to frame my question.
Okay.
So
Rules are meant to be broken.
okay. No, I mean, it was really good to hear Professor Bhagwan talk about the role that Vijayalakshmi Pandit actually played, you know, addressing the oppression of peoples all around the world, right? I saw Reverend Neil here, but no, he's not here at the moment. But here's my question. I'm going to give you 3 or 4 data points, and I'd like to hear back from Mrs. Sinha and Professor Bhagwan and yourself as well. The data points I see are these. In the last 3 years, the people who have spoken for the downtrodden and what is happening in Gaza is not India. It's a little nation called Gambia, and people of South Africa are taking our mantle, which we led, right? As a country, as a poor country, as an online country under the leadership of Vijayalakshmi Pandit and Nehru, who's litigating for the prosecution of what is happening, what Israel is doing in Gaza at this point in time. Where is the rule of law? It's Lula prosecuting what Bolsonaro did at this point in time. And where are we? Our foreign policies become bilateral, you know, with Pakistan and China. What does this reflect? Is this the hollowing of the Indian Foreign Service? Or is it that we don't really understand what is the notion of us as a country in the international stage? I don't know the answer to this question I'm asking you. Okay.
Well, thank you. The question is about Israel and Palestine as well as Indian leadership. So it's good to start the questions off with the easiest one to be able to address. I say facetiously. Obviously, this is the single most difficult thing right now. What isn't difficult, I think, is to say that women and children and innocent people should stop being killed. It's really not that difficult to say that, I think. So why aren't people doing that? I mean, I think the broader question here is a strategic one, that the current administration in India, for a variety of reasons, has made a set of strategic choices to align with the United States, also to align with Israel and several other powers. And in return for that, it would get technology, security agreements, it would get additional resources. And then as it's played out, they have not taken a bold leadership position on the moral question, because I think some of these other things have been at stake, which I think has come back to bite them in the backside with respect to now, like, no one can understand what is happening in the United States. And so the American president is sort of weaving left and right. And it's his imposition of tariffs on India, for example, are mystifying to many people, as I understand it, in the foreign policy establishment. And they're trying to figure out what exactly is going on and what the goal is. Is it about Ukraine? Is it about Israel? Is it about something else? Is it about humiliation? Is it about pushing American goods into India? So the short answer is, where are people speaking on Gaza? The answer is that there are some voices, the state perhaps not, but there are some voices, and it would be up to anyone to say what can be said, to push the state to make changes as necessary. Whether the Indian state reconfigures its position, I think ultimately is determined by changing geopolitical circumstances, which are unfolding as we speak. And I think there's going to be a major strategic set of choices facing the country. Whether that leads to realignment or not is unknown, but I think that that's where we are. Difficult question. That's the best I can do in a few seconds.
We also look at these issues very closely, and I feel that we don't have very strategic clarity, and we are still anticipating, like we don't know what's happening. I mean, there's some confusion going on in the Ministry of External Affairs, and it's not deliberate, but things are happening so fast, probably we are not used to respond. We are kind of fitting into, before we realize, something else happens. So I give them benefit of doubt to our diplomats. I mean, they've been trying, struggling. The messaging is not clear. So let's wait and watch.
I can just add one thing here. Yeah. See, this is what happens if the foreign policy becomes the prisoner of the domestic policy, and domestic politics becomes the prisoner of the diplomacy. So when things are decided that not at the diplomatic level, but at the ideological level, this is what really happens. I think the problem is much deeper, and problem is not only in the foreign policy level, but also beyond it. So that unless we try to understand that, and let's also understand that who were the people when Mr. Trump was contesting election, then they think that Mr. Trump will be the Sanatan Rakshak of this country. So that one word, that Mr. Trump will be the Sanatan Rakshak, defines everything, how and in what way we are doing to exercise our diplomacy in the foreign policy. Next question. Yeah, Muntar Khan sir.
If I may just... it's a comment which I think Professor Madhavan, can you hear me? Bhagwan. I think your point was very well taken when you talk about moral leadership. The difference between what you can claim to be a political voice for the global South, that's all. But if you lack moral leadership, you cannot have people just follow what was happening during the Nehru's time and Vijayalakshmi Pandit's time. You had the moral leadership, which is lacking. You cannot practice something else domestically, and then you go around the world and talk about Gandhi and Nehru. I think that's the duplicate. Exactly.
See, the word has become so much transactional. Yes, Khansa. Word has become so much transactional. Where is the moral value? So this is not the degeneration of the moral values, but basically the disappearance of the moral values in our discourse. You know what he's talking about? Ideology creates a delusional world where, listen, where the people are made to believe that you are part of a cosmic cause. It's drilled in their mind that even if you don't eat for 3-4 days, you will not die. But since you are part of a greater project, please sacrifice. And that's what exactly happened. Any more questions?
Yeah, in fact, Ashu, I had a point to just add on to what you were saying. I think everybody would agree what I'm wanting to ask you. Since we were talking about...
asking question to somebody?
Yeah, to
Okay.
both of them.
Okay.
Basically, we are talking about ethics, the moral compass, and we are like hitting against a wall because every day we are raising questions. And just to give you some of the latest examples, when Indians were chained and they were brought in from America, that's the most recent example, we did raise that issue. And all the channels had raised that issue that, it's something which is not ethical and for which even the government of India should have taken a stand. But we found our external affairs minister giving a very blank and a vacant statement inside the house, and he got away with it easily. We still went on discussing the same issue, not in one, but many programs. But even then, there were no solutions. So my limited point to ask you is that since we are discussing ethics, we are discussing morality around social, political, and cultural structures, which are dead absolutely, whether it is in America or whether it is in India. How do you amplify the narrative around ethics? That is one very big challenge, which I think all of us would agree that we are raising ethics, we are talking about humane issues, but people are watching as well. But how do you bring out the difference? How do you make the difference?
Mili, your question is to whom?
To both of them, and maybe very briefly, if both of you can answer.
Okay, so
My point is, how do you...
I get your point. So, why should we get entangled with the issues of ethics and morality? If we directly come to the issue of hunger and poverty and opportunities and employability, probably that would ultimately... Yeah, I get it. Yeah, they're there. So, if we talk of larger issues, probably many people are not able to comprehend, or maybe they already have some idea. But if it comes to individual needs, if they must be told, they have to be told that, your path does not lie there. You have to change your trajectory. You have to change your trajectory where you have to first make something of yourself. Uske baad jo karna hai kar lo. That is something, we have to do. And I'm sure that it cannot last for very long. All this delusion, all this cult will not last for very long, because ultimately...
You?
Yeah, I'm there.
Okay. We have already overshot by 5 minutes. So the last question, if you... Yeah. Professor what? Oh, Vashruji. Namaskar.
How do I just speak?
Just hold, just hold.
So I think this is a fascinating discussion, but there's a larger problem that we have to think about. Whatever the standing of moral politics, ethical moral politics domestically, is it in international relations externally, right? As I'm not saying as relevant, that it is relevant, but can it really, on the basis of that alone, can you really be counted as a power that the world can look up to? So let me give you an example. I think Manu is absolutely right that in the 1950s, India's standing in the world was very high, despite the fact that we were poor. So 1947 data, 1947-48 to 51 data is very clear. An estimated 2/3 of the country was below poverty line. India's literacy rate in 1947 was 18% after 200 years of British rule. India's industrial sector was generating at best 3 to 4% of GDP, maybe 5. You get the numbers a little later, which are clearer. And still, Manu is right, Nehru played a very important role in the resolution of the Korean War. That is true, and also in the Congo. Now, Nehru himself came to grief in 1962, when China defeated us so badly that, something very symbolic. The only time, according to biographers, when he publicly cried was when Lata Mangeshkar sang from Lal Kila, "Ae Mere Watan Ke Lo, Zara Aankh Mein Bhar Lo Pani." This is after the China War, right? China actually could have walked to Delhi. It was that bad. The situation was that bad. So Nehru's commitment to peace extended to not building the army or not modernizing the army, and the defeat came in 1962. They could have captured all of Assam. They could have walked to Delhi. The United States support saved us. That's becoming increasingly clear through the declassified documents, that Mao couldn't take on Kennedy and realized that that penetrating India any further militarily would lead to that consequence, that America would get involved on behalf of India. Okay, so what am I saying conceptually? What I'm saying conceptually is that moral leadership of India collapsed after 1962 when India was trounced on the battlefield. India's army men did not have the right kind of boots to fight in the Himalayas. They froze, a lot of them, right? So this is how the commitment to peace and commitment to a moral world was taken to this level. The question is, of course, India is stronger today economically. It is $4.5 trillion. It has actually gone ahead of Japan in terms of size of the economy, not per capita. Per capita is still very low. It hasn't touched even $2,000. Now, but yes, size is huge. We are militarily stronger, and we are a nuclear power, one of 8. One of 9 if you include Israel. So one of 9 nuclear powers. So all of that is true. The question is, can you also add moral dimension to the economic and military strength? Can you add moral dimension to? We needed economic strength, we needed military strength, but we also, given the way our freedom movement was run or led by Gandhi, and very good term he used, Nehru as a derivative of that. Nehru's power, Nehru's standing was a derivative of Gandhi's power and standing, because Nehru was Gandhi's colleague for so long, and Gandhi chose him over Patel. So, so now this challenge is a serious challenge. I don't know what the answer is, and perhaps we don't know what the answer is. Can moral posture be combined with economic and military strength?
Gosh. I would say a couple things here very quickly. To the point that you raised, Nilu, first, you know, I think about it this way. The way you were talking about what do we do and how do we convince people, I think that's the problem right there. I don't think you can convince people to act morally. It's something that they have to feel from inside. And in this, the lesson, again, comes from Gandhi, in my judgment. The secret to Gandhi's magic was not in his words, as was said. He wasn't actually a very good speaker or orator. The secret is in the way that he could connect to people. I'm sorry, I'm going to do as opposed to the academic thing. I think that he saw a universal connection between all living people, and that if you played to this connection through this bond of love, as he called it, you could awaken in them, no matter what injustices they were perpetrating, you could awaken in them a sense of grief and sorrow, and then a course corrective. That's the basis of his politics, at least the politics of Satyagraha, in my judgment. And so I think that ultimately is our tool. The tool is not what can you say on a broadcast, what can we write in an op-ed, what can I tell you in this room. The tool is how can we try to forge bonds and connections with the people who we feel like need to act, and also perhaps with whom we disagree. And that maybe is the hardest thing, but that's awakening that bond. The bond is there already. Awakening that, I think, is the way forward. Okay, so that was my thing for that. Okay, sorry, I just want to address Ashu. One correction.
I said India hasn't crossed 2000.
2008.
Okay.
We are at 2009.
Yeah.
Pakistan is half. That's also. I just wrote down that.
Japan is something around 30,000. Japan is something around 30,000. 35.
Japan is
35.
35. It's dropped from 40 to 41. Japan is not. Japan is blind.
I wouldn't take issue with that. Well, sorry.
Your permission?
Actually, my
I'm sorry.
question adds to his question, and part of the whatever he said answers to my question also, is that at what stages and in which ways have we failed to instill Gandhian thoughts, values in our society such that today anti-Gandhian thought has gained strength and shaped the present leadership leading to our predicament?
This needs another.
No, I won't do another long thing. I just want to say, I think that the problem that we're facing is it boils down to these are emotional reactions that people have, and we are discounting to our peril the feeling of pride. I think people have pride in themselves, firstly, which is a good thing, but also in their people, their community, and what they want to have pride in is their country, because that's the way people think of things, that their country represents them. And so I think people have an increased sense of pride. Why do they have that? Because there is relentless, frankly speaking, media, relentless propaganda that says that India is now great. Some of it is accurate. The data seems to support movement in better directions, broadly speaking. And people, I think we are making a mistake not to say that people are rightly proud of that. And that pride in those corrective measures then elides into a broader defense of everything is okay and we're great. That's the mistake. The mistake is between pride and this false sense of greatness, of superiority over everyone else. So you can have pride, and we should acknowledge having pride. Pride is okay and good. We should be proud of being stronger. We should be proud of being economically more viable. We should be proud of all of these things. But, well, as the saying goes, pride cometh before the fall. If not checked properly. Pride can only go so far before it becomes dangerous. It's falling into that dangerous category now. That's the gray zone that we're operating in. So the answer is, why not morality, or wherefore morality? The answer is, we must accept pride and cherish it, and then distinguish between pride and false pride or greatness, this claim to greatness, which comes at the expense of others.
Okay, thank you so much for such a great conversation and wonderful. Thank you, Manu. Thank you. Thank you so much.